What if I told you that in the heart of West Africa, a young soldier has transformed his nation into a beacon of defiance, hope, and rebirth? Welcome to Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a revolution unfolding before our eyes. Burkina Faso, once known as Upper Volta, is a country of proud warriors and farmers, a land where the red earth is tilled by hand, and where the drums of resistance still echo through the Sahel. But by 2022, the country was being torn apart. Islamist insurgencies ravaged its borders. Villages were abandoned, their huts left to crumble under the sun. Markets emptied as families fled from armed groups, leaving behind crops, livestock, and memories. Years of political instability had exhausted the people. Corruption scandals came and went. Leaders promised security but delivered only speeches. International troops marched in under the banner of help, yet the violence spread wider every year. By mid-2022, almost 2 million Burkinabe had been displaced, living in makeshift camps, their children growing up without schools or safety. Burkina Faso stood at a crossroads. On one side, submission, bowing to foreign powers, accepting endless poverty, waiting for aid that never came. On the other side, resistance, choosing to fight even if it meant standing alone. It was at this moment of crisis that a quiet but fearless young officer named Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward, before his name filled international headlines. Traoré was simply a village boy from Bondoukoui, in western Burkina Faso. He grew up walking dusty roads barefoot, fetching water from wells, and listening to elders speak of the proud, mossy kingdoms that once resisted colonial invaders. He was bright in school, studying geology at the University of Ouagadougou before joining the military in 2009. In the army, he gained a reputation for discipline and courage. Unlike many officers who stayed far from danger, Traoré fought on the front lines against insurgents. His men trusted him because he shared their hardships, eating the same rations, sleeping on the same ground, facing the same bullets. By 2022, at just 34 years old, he was a captain young but already seasoned by war. When fellow soldiers spoke of betrayal by senior leaders who failed to protect the nation, Traoré listened. When villagers complained of being forgotten, he listened again. What he did not do was wait for someone else to act. Burkina Faso had already seen one coup earlier that year, but the situation only worsened. Soldiers on the ground were outgunned. Villages kept falling and morale hit rock bottom. Traoré and a group of officers decided enough was enough. In October 2022, they marched into the capital Ouagadougou, removed the failing leadership, and took control. This was not a coup backed by foreign embassies. It was not engineered in secret boardrooms. It was raw and driven by survival. When Traoré addressed the nation, there were no polished talking points, no diplomatic niceties. He stood before cameras in his military uniform and spoke with conviction. We will not watch our country fall apart. We will restore our dignity, even if we must do it alone. For ordinary Burkinabe, weary of being told by outsiders how to live, this was a thunderclap of hope. Crowds poured into the streets waving flags, chanting his name. For the first time in years, people felt that their destiny was in their own hands. Traoré's next move shocked the world. For decades, Burkina Faso, like many former French colonies, hosted foreign troops and advisors who claimed to be fighting terrorism. Yet the attacks kept spreading. In December 2022, Traoré ordered French forces to leave the country. It was a bold act of sovereignty that few African leaders dared attempt. Critics in Paris and Washington warned of disaster. Pundits said Burkina Faso would collapse without foreign help. But Traoré insisted, the defense of our homeland will be done by our own sons and daughters. This decision resonated deeply with Burkinabe citizens. No longer would decisions about their land be made in foreign capitals. The air in Ouagadougou buzzed with a new energy, a mixture of pride and defiance. People began to believe again that their country, long treated as a pawn in global power games, could chart its own course. With foreign troops gone, Traoré faced a colossal challenge: how to protect Burkina Faso with limited weapons, training, and funding. Instead of pleading for outside intervention, he turned to his people. He launched the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland (VDP) program, calling on ordinary citizens to join the fight. Farmers, merchants, students, tens of thousands answered. These were not mercenaries. They were patriots. The government trained them, armed them, and sent them to defend their own villages. In dusty training camps, young men and women learned to march, shoot, and communicate. They were motivated not by salaries, but by survival and honor. In markets and mosques, people spoke of a new spirit of solidarity. We protect our own. This people's army, combined with loyal soldiers, began to push back against insurgents. Villages once under siege were liberated. Slowly, life started to return to areas long abandoned. As the security situation slowly improved, Traoré turned his attention to something even more: fundamental Burkina Faso's economy. For decades, this nation had been rich in gold, cotton, and fertile land, yet its people remained among the poorest in the world. The reason was simple. Much of the wealth flowed outward to foreign companies and corrupt elites, rather than to ordinary Burkina citizens. Traoré declared that this cycle would end. New agreements were negotiated with mining companies to ensure that a far larger share of revenue stayed in the country. Corrupt middlemen were sidelined, and government audits cracked down on theft. Gold, long a symbol of Burkina Faso's exploitation, became a tool of national renewal. State revenue surged, giving the government resources it hadn't seen in years. But Traoré didn't stop there. He pushed hard for agricultural self-reliance, warning that no nation could call itself free if it couldn't feed its people. Programs were launched to support farmers with improved seeds, irrigation projects, and access to local markets. By investing in rural communities, Traoré sent a clear message: Burkina Faso's future wouldn't be written in foreign boardrooms, it would be grown in its own fields, by its own hands. In Ouagadougou's crowded markets, the results were becoming visible. Traders spoke of better prices for their goods. Farmers said they no longer had to sell crops for pennies to foreign buyers. And for the first time in years, the countryside felt a cautious optimism, not because someone promised aid, but because Burkina themselves were writing their own destiny. Captain Ibrahim Traoré understood something many older leaders ignored. Youth are not just the future, they are the present. With over 70% of Burkina Faso's population under the age of 30, any plan to rebuild the nation had to start with empowering young people. Years of insurgency had closed hundreds of schools. Children in rural areas were growing up without classrooms, and an entire generation risked being lost. Traoré moved quickly to reopen schools in liberated zones, sometimes personally visiting frontline areas to oversee reconstruction efforts. He called education a weapon more powerful than any rifle, and backed those words with action. Scholarships were offered to train young engineers, doctors, and teachers at home and abroad. New vocational programs gave young Burkina practical skills in construction, agriculture, and technology tools, not just for survival, but for national transformation. University campuses, once quiet from fear and neglect, began to buzz with political debate and patriotic pride. Students spoke openly about sovereignty, resource control, and African unity. As one young woman in Ouagadougou put it during a public rally, "We are not a poor people. We are a plundered people who are taking back what is ours." The youth movement became more than just a support base for Traoré. It became the beating heart of Burkina Faso's new identity. Burkina Faso's revolution didn't stay inside its borders. In Mali and Niger, neighbors, facing similar struggles with insurgency and foreign control, young leaders and soldiers were watching closely. They too had grown tired of old alliances that drained their resources while failing to bring peace. In 23, Traoré, alongside Mali's Assimi Goïta and Niger's Abdourahmane Chiani, forged a powerful alliance. These three Sahel nations rejected pressure from former colonial powers and announced plans for joint military operations, economic cooperation, and even a shared currency independent of the CFA franc across Africa. Crowds began chanting Traore's name not as a savior, but as proof that African nations could stand tall and free. In Senegal, Chad, and beyond, young people waved Burkina Faso's red, green, and gold flag as a symbol of resistance to neocolonialism. This movement sent shockwaves across Western capitals. Analysts warned that Traore was destabilizing the region. But for millions of Africans, he was doing something far more profound. He was showing that sovereignty was still possible. With every bold decision came a battle for perception. Western media outlets painted Traore as reckless, inexperienced, even dangerous. They warned of chaos without foreign guidance, accusing Burkina Faso of falling into the wrong hands. But inside Burkina Faso, a very different story was unfolding. State television showcased villages being liberated, schools reopening, and farmers thriving. Local journalists traveled alongside soldiers to document successes, ignored by foreign networks. Social media became a powerful weapon. Young Burkinabe flooded Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter with images of their leader visiting front lines, shaking hands with volunteers, and standing shoulder to shoulder with his people. Mass rallies filled Ouagadougou's streets. Thousands carried placards reading, "Sovereignty or Death." Others held up portraits of Traore with the words, "Son of the Homeland." This media war revealed more than just differing opinions. It exposed a global struggle over who gets to tell Africa's story: outsiders with their own agendas, or Africans themselves. Despite the enthusiasm, Traore's path is far from smooth. Terrorist attacks still plague remote areas, and security forces remain stretched thin. Funding is always tight, and without powerful foreign backers, Burkina Faso must rely almost entirely on its own limited resources and a few new partners willing to trade on fair terms. The young captain also faces political risks at home. Not everyone agrees with his rapid changes. Some older elites resent being pushed aside. Others fear that Burkina Faso's isolation from traditional allies could hurt the economy in the long run. But Traore's style of leadership is hands-on and personal. Instead of hiding in presidential palaces, he visits battlefields, sits under trees with villagers, and listens to their concerns. Soldiers say he eats the same food as they do. Civilians say he speaks plainly, not like a politician, but like a fellow citizen who shares their struggles. This authenticity has earned him extraordinary loyalty. Whether it can withstand years of pressure, both from foreign governments and internal opponents, remains to be seen. But for now, Burkina Faso's people are standing behind their captain, even as Burkina Faso fought to secure its borders and reform its economy. Captain Traore knew that a nation's soul is found in its culture. Decades of foreign domination had not only drained the country's wealth, they had eroded its sense of identity. Imported music, imported television, and imported values overshadowed the rhythms, dances, and legends of the Burkinabe people. Traore began to speak openly about returning to cultural roots. He reminded the nation that long before European colonization, Burkina Faso's ancestors, the Masi, the Gourmanche, the Fulani, built kingdoms, traded with distant lands, and resisted invaders with courage and honor. He encouraged schools to teach local history, instead of relying solely on foreign textbooks that glorified colonial powers. Traditional festivals returned to the streets of Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso. The masks of the Lobi and Bois peoples danced again. Griots, the traditional storytellers, were invited to national events, sharing tales of ancient warriors who defended the land with spears and courage, inspiring modern Burkinabe to do the same with rifles and determination. Artisans who once struggled to sell their crafts now found government programs, buying and exporting their work, proving that culture could be a source of pride and income. Traore even used national broadcasts to showcase traditional music, reminding everyone that sovereignty isn't just about armies or gold. It's about knowing who you are. In markets and villages, people began to greet each other with renewed warmth. It wasn't just patriotism. It was a rediscovery of belonging. Burkina Faso's women have long been silent, pillars of the nation, running farms, raising children, managing markets, and holding communities together through famine and war. But under Traore, women are no longer silent. They are becoming leaders in the revolution. Traore often says, if the men defend the land with rifles, the women defend it with their hands, their voices, and their courage. He appointed women to key government positions and expanded civic programs run by female leaders. In rural areas, women's cooperatives now receive direct funding to grow food, make textiles, and organize local defense networks. On the front lines, women volunteer to provide supplies and medical support to soldiers. In cities, female activists lead rallies, speak on radio programs, and educate young girls about their role in Burkina Faso's rebirth. One powerful moment came when a group of village women blocked a road to warn soldiers of an impending ambush. When journalists asked them why they risked their lives, one woman replied, "This is our land too. If we don't fight for it, who will?" Traore has made it clear that this revolution is not just for men in uniform. It's for every Burkina citizen, regardless of gender. And the women of Burkina Faso are proving themselves as vital as any soldier in the fight for sovereignty. With old colonial powers pushed out, Burkina Faso began looking for new partners. Traore turned to nations willing to cooperate on equal terms: Russia, Turkey, and other emerging powers. These relationships brought weapons, training, and infrastructure projects without the political strings attached by former Western allies. Russian instructors arrived to help train soldiers. Turkish companies began discussing solar plants, roads, and trade zones. Deals were signed to build irrigation systems in drought-hit regions and factories to process Burkina Faso's own resources locally, instead of shipping raw materials overseas. For the first time, Burkina people could see visible signs of progress. Roads were being paved where only dirt tracks had existed. New markets opened in rural towns, linking farmers directly to buyers. Solar energy projects promised electricity for villages long left in the dark. Traore emphasized that these partnerships weren't about replacing one master with another. They were about choosing friends, not owners. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would trade with anyone, but its sovereignty was not for sale. As Captain Ibrahim Traoré's leadership gained global attention, he became more than just the head of state of Burkina Faso. He became a symbol for all of Africa. In Ghana, youth groups painted murals of his face. In Mali and Niger, rallies featured his image alongside other anti-colonial leaders. On social media, videos of his fiery speeches, often delivered in a calm, unpolished military tone, went viral across the continent. Africans saw in Traoré something rare, a young leader willing to risk his life, not for wealth or fame, but for freedom. He refused to bow to foreign pressure, refused to hide from his people, and refused to accept the idea that Africa must always beg for help. But this new fame also came with danger. Assassination plots, diplomatic isolation, and economic sabotage all became real threats. Foreign powers unhappy with Traoré's stance tried to cut Burkina Faso off from aid and loans. Yet the young captain only grew more determined, saying in a national address, "They will not forgive us for standing tall, but we will not kneel." Across Africa, a question began to echo. If Burkina Faso can do it, why not us? Burkina Faso's revolution is still unfolding. The fight against terrorism isn't over. The economy still faces enormous pressure, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, though beloved by many, knows his leadership will be tested by both internal enemies and powerful foreign interests. But what is undeniable is the change in spirit. For the first time in years, Burkina citizens feel ownership of their country. Villagers defend their own homes. Students debate the future with pride. Women organize local industries. Soldiers and civilians fight side by side. This is not just a political shift, it is a national awakening. Traoré often says, "We have no choice but victory." For Burkina Faso, victory means not only defeating insurgents, but proving that a small African nation can stand on its own feet. And as the world watches, The Burkina people continue to write their story a story of courage, sacrifice, and hope. If you believe in Africa standing tall, if you want to hear the real stories of nations, breaking free from the chains of the past, make sure you subscribe to Captain of Africa. Together, let's follow this journey as Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traoré shows the world what true sovereignty looks like.